So, FFP is kind of strange. Let's take a look at it. So when looking at the current financial climate of football, one thing that's clear to see is that we're slowly turning towards a more fixed and manageable player acquisition process. FFP, or financial fair play, is a term that's been floating around for a while now, and while many of you would have heard it a lot more during this year's winter transfer window, this January Premier League clubs spent a total of just £100 million, which might sound like a lot to you non-football fans, but is an insane £750 million reduction from the previous season, partly thanks to Chelsea, I admit. So when I started to think at how clubs will maneuver through the new FFP and PSR rules set by UEFA from the Premier League, it gives me an idea of how we may be approaching a more American style system for player sales and overall financial management. So if you're not caught up by now, FFP, or financial fair play, are a set of regulations that were established in the late 2000s to prevent professional football clubs from spending more than they were earning. This might sound like a simple budgeting technique to you and I, but football clubs have a habit of pushing the boundaries when it comes to their accounts. Okay, pushing the boundaries is probably a bit of an understatement, especially when it comes to the reckless spending of teams like West Ham, Portsmouth and Leeds in the late 90s and 2000s. All three of these clubs were careless overspenders, which in turn led to relegation for the trio, and even worse for Portsmouth and Leeds, who needed administration to save themselves from liquidation. Introducing FFP and PSR was essential for European clubs to be held accountable for their spending and their business structures. Current profit and sustainability laws prohibit Premier League clubs from making losses of over £105 million over a 3-year period. This essentially restricts clubs from losing over £35 million a year. I know what you're thinking though, why on earth would a business willingly want to lose money? Well, in any business venture, sometimes you have to lose money to make money, and with the biggest clubs now being owned by multi-billion pound consortiums, oligarchs and even full nation states, losing a few £100 million in order to achieve success is a risk worth taking. Bringing a club which wholly represents a community, city and even a nation sustained success can also be advantageous for owners who may want their public image to be shifted into a positive light in the Western world. FFP has in turn led to stricter protocols from clubs looking to navigate the transfer market. Everton, who are already facing a relegation battle this season, received a 10-point deduction for exceeding the £105 million barrier by about £20 million. That's how harsh the punishments can be. Sponsorship deals, increased stadium use for external events and sales of academy graduates have been methods used by European teams to try and increase revenue. Another interesting tactic used by Chelsea was extended amortization to reduce the yearly cost of transfers. So, for anyone not familiar with amortization in football, this is the process of spreading out a player's transfer fee over the duration of their contract. So let's say, for example, we've got 2 clubs and 1 player. Club A signs a talented player from Club B for £50 million and they agree a 5-year contract with the player. If we divide £50 million by 5 years, that means that Club A will pay Club B £10 million a season for 5 years in instalments. This is a typical deal done by many teams. However, what the new Chelsea ownership spotted is that there is no cap on the length of contracts that can be offered to players, meaning in theory they could offer long contracts and pay less each year, also meaning that their 3-year FFP periods wouldn't be as hindered. An example of this is Moises Caicedo, who was signed from Brighton for a record £115 million this season. If Caicedo was signed on a 5-year contract, Chelsea would have had to pay £23 million a year to Brighton over that time. However, Chelsea signed Caicedo to an 8-year contract, which means that they will only pay around £15 million per season for the next 8 years, whether he stays or not. Chelsea have done this with a whole bunch of players, which leaves them more space within their 3-year FFP periods, but now leaves them with the burden of young players on long contracts who might not even turn out that good. This is a whole nother video though. While Chelsea's use of amortization revealed a loophole in the market, players themselves began to use their own devices for completing transfers to new clubs. Free agency has always been a valuable asset to clubs looking to bypass transfer fees and discuss terms directly with the player. However, in the modern era, clubs are now using the process to sign some of the best talents in the world. Lionel Messi, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Robert Lewandowski and Thiago Silva are all signings that have been acquired in the market as free agents in the last decade. More recently, Aston Villa have been lethal in free agency the past 2 summer windows. They've acquired Boubacar Kamara on a free transfer after his Marseille contract ran down, and Yuri Tillemans this summer, who was poached once his Leicester City contract ran down as well. The fact that clubs are able to bypass transfer fees means that a player wanting to move away doesn't have to worry about long negotiations between teams. Think of Harry Kane in the 2021 transfer window. After years at Spurs without a trophy, the England striker was itching for a step up in his career, especially given Tottenham's lack of direction, having just changed their manager for the 5th time in 7 years. Pep Guardiola's Manchester City made a bid of £100 million, but Tottenham's stance was clear. Harry Kane was not for sale. He had just signed a mammoth 6-year contract a few seasons before, and Tottenham CEO Daniel Levy felt no obligation to sell his prized asset to a direct rival. Now, imagine if Kane had let his contract run down instead of signing for the 6 years, then his power in this situation would have been multiplied. He did finally get his transfer this summer as Tottenham sanctioned a sale to Bayern Munich with only a year left on his current deal. The most prominent example of this situation occurring at this moment in time is with Kylian Mbappe, PSG and Real Madrid. The French star has signed a succession of short 1 or 2 year contracts with an idea in mind to leave for the Spanish giants once his deal has ended. This ensures that he will not have to sweat over transfer negotiations between the clubs. PSG are likely to be stubborn in negotiations and demand a fee of upwards of £200 million. So with FFP regulations getting tighter each season, as transfer fee inflation outruns the £105 million restriction, it makes sense for star players who would normally command a 9-figure transfer fee to understand the market under FFP and run down their contracts to ensure that they can move forward with their careers, but also so big moves are easier for clubs to take on with financial fair play present. So while free agency is a player acquisition process in football that mirrors American sports, player trades are not as reflected in the football market compared to leagues like the NFL and NBA. In the American leagues, teams spend the overwhelming majority of their cap space on player salaries rather than financial compensation. Just a quick one, cap space for American sports teams is essentially their version of financial fair play allowance for football teams. So we have seen these types of transfers in football, like Ashley Cole and William Gallas in 2006, Zlatan and Eto'o swapping between Barcelona and Inter Milan in 2009, and Alexis Sanchez and Mkhitaryan in 2018. However, the overall complexities of football contracts is a stumbling block for wanting to trade players. NFL and NBA contracts are centralized by their respective leagues, meaning that player trades don't result in new contracts being mandatorily signed, and these player contracts are essentially just moved over to their new team. Football players, on the other hand, are given autonomy over who they are transferred to, which possesses another restriction to player trades being a viable way around FFP restrictions. So now that we've spoken about how teams can reduce their expenditure to meet FFP thresholds, I would like to quickly touch on ways clubs can increase their revenue to ensure that they're managing losses against income. A few examples that we can see in a modern game are clubs selling academy talents, which are seen as pure profit in annual accounts. Man City and Chelsea are probably the two best teams when it comes to this tactic. City have sold the likes of Cole Palmer to Chelsea for £42.5 million, Iheanacho to Leicester for £25 million, James Trafford to Burnley for £19 million, and Romeo Lavia to Southampton for £24 million. With all their academy sales accumulated, they have raised £260 million in the last 10 years with their academy sales. Chelsea in turn have sold Mason Mount for £55 million, Tammy Abraham for £35 million, Fikayo Tomori for £27 million, and Tino Livramento for £22.4 million. They have in turn earned £285 million with their academy sales in the last 10 years. Another strategy being used by clubs across the continent is investing in stadium renovation and rebuilding for the sake of multi-purpose use. Juventus, Spurs and Brentford have all moved into new corporate-friendly stadiums that will increase their revenue streams. Spurs especially with their collaboration with the NFL, boxing and A-Star music events. Even lower league clubs are using new stadia for multi-use purposes. AFC Wimbledon, Barnet and Boston United have all used their stadiums to increase income from non-football operations. Revenue from club facilities is just one way football teams can dilute losses along with sponsorship contracts and kit deals. This strategy can enter murky waters, however, when influential owners can illegally inflate accounts with dodgy deals between their own separate companies and their football clubs. So as we've learned, financial fair play does not accumulate academy renovations, but another investment pipeline it doesn't account for is anything related to women's football operations. The average revenue generated by 15 of the highest revenue generating women's clubs across European football in 22-23 stood at €4.3 million. This marks a 61% increase over these clubs' 2021-22 average revenues of €2.6 million and highlights the steep growth and trajectory of women's football across the continent. The increased interest in women's football will mean that clubs will invest more in player signings in the effort of profit from TV deals, shirt sales and brand partnerships. As the financial restrictions in the men's game grow, do not be surprised if we start to see high fees for transfers in the women's game that run adjacent to transfers in the men's game. It was only this week that Premier League officials met to discuss the new profit and sustainability rules proposed that will fall more in line with UEFA's rules. UEFA's new financial regulations, known as the squad cost rule, mean a club's total expenditure on transfers, wages and agent fees cannot exceed 70% of their revenue. UEFA is, however, staggering its implementation. Clubs could not exceed 90% of their revenue this season, 80% in the 2024-25 season, and 70% 20% for the 2025-26 campaign. This new rule makes slightly more sense, as instead of a fixed number of £105 million, the bar to reach is judged primarily on the club's own finances. Even with the current £105 million threshold, clubs can only really make a loss of £15 million unless the owner has shown a commitment to offset the other £90 million through the acquisition of new stocks. With the current financial climate in football changing drastically by the season and new rules proposed to streamline restrictions between the Premier League and UEFA, the game is getting more complex by the day. I've been le.tj, this is FOOTNOW. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.